Youth and a Vision for Life. Welcome to this session in which we consider the three basic ingredients of a wholesome, spiritually sound way of dealing with or stewarding our life, particularly when we are young. An important aspect of modern life is widely agreed to be the sense of drift. People merely exist from day to day so that we become more like tramps rather than travelers. One of the significant literary works in this regard is Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, where you have two tramps, Vladimir and Estragon. They're all dressed up, they're ready to go, but they have nowhere to go. They're stuck. And they think that they can begin the journey of your life, of their life, once they resolve the riddle about who this Godot is, about whom also they have no clear idea. Now, this is a portrayal of the human predicament at the present time. And I don't have to argue this that such a state, such a human condition, is merely and surely wasteful of all our huge and glorious potential. And therefore, young people in particular must consider this to be a problem that needs to be addressed and a solution for which needs to be found. So, in this video, I make three suggestions that young people may consider for their examination, adoption, and if need be, adaptation, because every individual has to adapt to his or her particular personal genius, personal situation, the general principles that are enunciated. Now, these three principles that I'm going to refer to are found in the teachings of Jesus Christ and his life as a whole. And let me straight away examine them. The first is the principle of memory. It's obvious that Jesus attached great significance to memory. In fact, he instituted memory as a sacrament through the Last Supper. Most Christians don't realize that the Last Supper is a sacrament of memory. Jesus very clearly says, "Do this in remembrance of me." In doing so, Jesus was educating his disciples as to the importance of memory. Now, there are two levels or categories of memory. One is personal memory and the other is collective memory. Personal memory is the sum and substance of what I have gone through, maybe what I have read, or what I have heard people say to me, the knowledge derived from others, and the experiences that others have shared with me as meaningful experiences from their own life. So, whatever we have experienced, heard, known, assimilated in the past, which struck me in those days and continues to strike me, strike us as meaningful, as relevant, as valuable, so on and so forth. Memory. Then there is a collective memory, the memory of a people. Now, very often the word used for this is tradition. We know that the Jews are particularly outstanding in their commitment to tradition. If you remember that film, Fiddler on the Roof, there, at the very beginning of the film, it said, the whole of Jewish life can be summarized in one word, and that is tradition. And there is something important about it, something that we need to take very seriously. Now, to understand the importance of memory, let's consider a medical condition. When a person grows old, that person suffers, not everyone, but a certain portion of the people in their old age suffer from a condition called dementia. Dementia. Now, that's the total loss of memory. And it is unbearably sad to be with a person who is in that condition, especially if you have been related to that person in the past. You become total strangers. So there is utter break or discontinuity in relationship between uh, you and a person who is suffering from dementia. So this proves that memory plays an important part in personality as well as identity. And Jesus sort of includes all of this when he institutes memory or remembrance as a very important spiritual discipline. This you do in remembrance of me. Do not forget. Psalm 103, the psalmist says, do not forget all his benefits. Bless the Lord, O my soul, all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Why does the psalmist say that? Because we tend to forget. And forgetfulness is a common human weakness. And because it is our weakness, we need to make special efforts to ensure that we overcome that weakness. People tend to make an excuse of their weaknesses, but what we need to do if we are spiritually dynamic and if we are serious about making our life meaningful is to fight against our weaknesses, to overcome our weaknesses, or to compensate for our weaknesses. For example, if you have dealt with people who are visually challenged or those who are blind, you'll find that they have extraordinary memory, extraordinary. It's incredible how developed their memory becomes. They also have extraordinary touch sensitivity as well as smell sensitivity. I had a blind student way back in the 70s, mid 70s. His name was Gangadhar. Gangadhar used to live in a block of residence on the campus of the college, and he would go about everywhere without any problem, and he would be extremely punctual at classes in the morning. And the first class, I used to take the morning classes. 8:40 is the first lecture every day. And Gangadhar would be there dot on time. So one day I was curious and I asked Gangadhar, and he didn't have a watch. In those days, braille watches were very rare, and this boy came from a poor background, family background, and he couldn't afford one. So he didn't have a watch. And he was always punctual. And I asked Gangadhar as to how he managed it. And to my utter shock, surprise, and joy, he said, sir, I smell the morning. By smelling the morning, I know the hour of the morning. There are subtle variations of smell in the morning. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I don't know if you actually believe it. I found it very difficult to believe it then, but I had to believe it because the evidence was there in front of me. He was there in my classroom without fail every day, more punctual than the sighted students of mine. And he would say, well, I can smell time. That's amazing, isn't it? So there are these compensations. Now, memory. We can always compensate for our weaknesses. So it's a common human feeling that we have weak memory and we tend to forget, especially the good things that happen to us. We always remember the bad things, the unpleasant things that happen to us. Somebody would have done us 100 favors, but if that person said something harsh to us, maybe in an unguarded moment, one day we will remember that for the rest of our life, and all the good things that he or she did, we tend to forget. That's psychology that Mark Antony uses when he gives the funeral oration for Caesar in that play, Julius Caesar, where he says, "The good that people do is oft forgotten, and the evil is interred with their bones, and the evil that they do is remembered after them." The good that people do is interred, is buried with their bones, and the evil that they do is remembered after them. So let it be with Caesar, so on and so forth. So, anyway, I was talking to you about the importance of memory. Now, um, just as an individual who loses this great power of memory becomes a very poor and a pathetic specimen of humanity, so also a people who lose their memory or their tradition. I said that the collective memory is called tradition. As a student of literature, I can tell you how important literary traditions are. If you want to understand a particular work, you have to read it within the tradition within which it is produced. So, just as literature has a tradition, everything else also has its own corresponding tradition. So, we have something called the Christian tradition, or on a broader sense, we have the spiritual tradition. Christian tradition is what we hold in common among Christian believers. But beyond that, there is a spiritual tradition which every human being must share with every other human being, because ultimately we belong to the species called humanity. We are not merely Christians, we are also human beings. And in fact, the great emphasis in the life and teachings of Jesus Christ was that we must first and foremost become human beings, and then thereafter anything else. So, memory. Now, Jesus says, if you have to lead, or if you wish to lead a clean, healthy, vital, dynamic life, you need inspiring memories. Inspiring memories. Let's take an example from the teachings of Jesus Christ, the parable of the lost son. He goes to a far country, makes a mess of his life, and in the very nadir, in the lowest level of his degradation, he becomes aware of his home. He remembers his home. And it is that remembrance that saves him. But for the remembrance, he would have continued in that state of degradation and he would have perished among the pigs. So that substantial or that great is the importance of memory in our life. Now the question is, what are we to do about this memory? So each one of us has to deliberately make investments in good memories. What are the sort of experiences that we tend to remember? Meaningful experiences that contributed to the richness and dignity of our personality, experiences that illumined the point of contact between us and the purposes of God, something larger than us, experiences that connected us to the good substratum of humanity, experiences that enabled us to express what is good, true, and noble within ourselves, and therefore connected us to the best that's all around us. So, all these things are comprehended in the past records of God's way of dealing with people, which is what religions are supposed to be. But of course, religions tend to accumulate for themselves all sorts of worldly accretions. Therefore, I have to say that God's ways with people are recorded in the scriptures, the life and teachings of the great spiritually enlightened souls who became the pathfinders, the pioneers and pathfinders spiritually for them. So we cannot afford to forget them. We have to remember them. This is not a grudging duty that we extend to them. It is a basic service that we render to ourselves. If we lose that memory, we become spiritually demented. And the evidence of that can be seen wherever you turn these days. You only have to keep your eyes open. So it's very important. Memory is very important. But then memory means that uh, we have to live our life in such a way that we have a fund of good and empowering memories. For example, now I'm an old man, my active life is behind me, but my life is still rich because I have good, enriching, empowering, in fact, exhilarating memories. Actually, the blessedness of old age in this kind of life is that your heart and your mind, your whole body is full of gratitude. Gratitude for the great things that God caused to happen in your life and through you in the life of others. Great memories. Ultimately, you are left only with the banquet of great memories. But what happens to those people who have nothing worthwhile to remember? That is really the predicament. So, old age is not a problem. My witness to everyone is old age is not a problem. The problem really is that we tend to live our life, especially when we are young, unmindful of the fact that the only treasure that will endure with us are good memories. And therefore, when we are young, vital, and able to live life abundantly, we need to invest in good memories. So, and as far as Christians are concerned, and not merely Christians really, but let me put it this way, as far as Christians are concerned, they need to have lots of memories about the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, how do we generate good memories that endure a lifetime and beyond of Jesus Christ? Only by abiding in Him and letting Him abide in us. That's what He said, John chapter 15, verse 4. Abide in me and I in you. If you do that, you will produce abundant harvest. These are harvests of memory. When we abide in the Lord Jesus Christ and let Him abide in us, the harvest that is produced through our life is a harvest of very profound, unforgettable, rich, treasurable memories. And this treasure will endure all through our life and beyond. So, one important aspect of our life is memory. Please invest in creating or gathering to yourself rich and enduring memories. The second important ingredient of life is obedience. Obedience to the will of God. Now, I know that obedience is not a popular word with young people, particularly these days, but life cannot be without obedience. For example, you obey the secular laws of a society. You cannot live otherwise. You have to obey. You obey natural laws. Life becomes impossible if you don't obey natural laws. For example, it is natural law that there is something called the force of gravity. Therefore, if you jump from the top of a tree, it will come crashing down and you could hurt yourself seriously and maybe your life itself could be lost. So that's natural law. If you touch fire, your finger will burn. That's natural law. You have to obey. In fact, life is possible only because of obedience. And when we are young, when we are little children, we obeyed our parents. In the same manner, no matter how young or old we are still children of God. Just as we obeyed our parents when we were children, so also we must obey God when, irrespective of our age, because we are always children in relation to God. Now, what is the significance of obeying God? Now, to me, and this is my personal experience, obeying God is the foremost means for liberating oneself from one's own limitations. Now, let's understand this. Most people tend to obey their own will. Now, this itself is a problematic category because our will is formed. And our will is formed through the various exposures we have had. And we have always been exposed to other people including family members, people in the neighborhood, and people beyond. And as we grew from our childhood into teenage and adulthood, we became increasingly exposed to the world around us. And therefore, we have become virtually the compendium of, or the sum total of the various influences that acted upon us. So, what we consider to be our own will may not be our will at all. It may be the will formed as a result of the many, many innumerable influences that acted upon us continuously over a long period of time, which we assume to be our own will. Now, the point is that this will, while it is important, is very limited. So, our will is formed in terms of past experiences, but we also need to go forward. So if we become self-willed and live entirely by that, we look at situations and decide only in terms of our own individual or personal will, then we remain stuck. But we need to go forward. So the will of God is the means by which this uh, state of being anchored in the past is broken, and we are given the freedom to go forward to all that yet remains to be experienced, revealed, understood, and celebrated. That's why it is said that obedience to God is perfect freedom. What is freedom? The perfect freedom here referred to is the freedom to move from the past through the present into the future. It's a freedom to be open to newer possibilities, newer dimensions, newer awareness. And that is something exciting. So, when I say that the second important principle or guiding light of our life must be obedience to the will of God, I intend this deliberately to be a very dynamic, positive, creative, and personality enriching principle. You know, there are people who tend to shrink in their personality, and they do not have the inner strength even to be exposed to, much less consider positively, anything which is even marginally different from the small little things, the narrow range of possibilities that they are aware of. And we call them small creatures or shallow creatures. And it's actually pathetic to come across people like that. Unfortunately, there are too many in our times. And you will see that if you compare a person who is dynamically engaged with the will of God for him, and to be engaged with the will of God for oneself is also to be engaged with the will of God concerning all around us. So if you consider the plight and the personality of one who is living entirely by his own will, and one who is aware of this larger dimension of life, you will see how amazingly different the two are. And one is far more inspiring, inwardly beautiful, positive, life, radiating, so on and so forth. The other person begins to shrink more and more into himself. And, being with such a person is so very disappointing. And unfortunately, so it's hard to say it, it's hard to be with such people. And that's a condemnation that we invite upon ourselves when we live only to ourselves, reducing the range of our experiences, possibilities, and therefore also for our growth and development, as a result of which we remain stunted and become mockeries of ourselves. So, in this respect, being aware of the will of God and being open to obeying it is a great liberating principle, and that's the freedom that we find in the personality of Jesus. Jesus strikes us as a person of pure freedom because he obeyed the will of God, of his Father in heaven. And in fact, as Paul writes to Philippians, he says Jesus not only obeyed, he perfected obedience, obedience even unto death on the cross. Now that is a great liberating principle. Now the thing is, since obedience is an inalienable aspect of the logic and the working principle of life, it is necessary that we obey. So to the last breath of our life, we'll obey somebody or the other. The choice is between obeying God on the one hand, and obeying somebody else or something else. For example, people obey the authority of a party leadership. Some people obey their bosses in the workplace. I'm not saying that you should not. I'm only saying that these types of obedience are very, very limited in relation to the need to develop the hidden possibilities, the not yet manifest possibilities of your life. When you obey God, you're actually led to zones of experience that you otherwise would never even consider. So there are people who obey, uh, for example, as in the case of peer group pressure, obey their own peers, not because they are better in any sense as compared to them. If anything, they are far worse, because the peer group pressure always operates in terms of deflecting a person from the meaningful directions and goals of one's life. So there, implicit obedience is demanded, and implicit obedience is accorded without any debate or hesitation. There are others who obey public opinion. They have no opinion of their own. So there are all kinds of and modes of obedience, but all this is considered normal, natural, and beneficial, or the natural thing to do. But when it comes to obeying God, who comprehends all the possibilities ever known and ever to be known, that's considered to be something shameful. For the life of me, I can't understand the logic of it. I can only say this to you, that the richest experience, of the most memorable, meaningful, empowering experiences of my life are all in the category of obeying the will of God. Now, there are people who have asked me in the past, how do we know the will of God? I mean, it's easy to say you must obey the will of God, but how do we know what the will of God concerning us is? Well, all I can tell you is that in my case, it wasn't all that mind boggling or brain cudgeling. If you are open to it, the will of God will be revealed to you. It is something very private and personal between you and God. But if you are turned away from God, then there is no way the will of God can be revealed to you. The will of God continues to be revealed, but whether or not you receive it, recognize and receive it, is entirely up to you, because God respects your freedom and freedom of choice. God will not thrust anything upon you. Therefore, obedience to the will of God. So far, we have considered two principles: memory, obedience to God, and finally, faithfulness. Now, we have to be faithful to ourselves. We have to be faithful to the humanity to which we belong. Now, most people live in a state of quarrel within themselves. For example, we have something called conscience. Conscience is traditionally explained or defined as the voice of God speaking within ourselves. I have a slightly different definition of conscience. I understand conscience as a voice of our own humanity, the voice of my own true self, crying out to me whenever and wherever I act in violation of the true self that I am. Now, the very paradoxical and the profound thing about being human is we are always two, we are at least two, if not three. We are the self that we think we are, but we are also that self which we need to be, which we are not yet. But that self which we are not yet is still real, active. Therefore, when the self that we think we are acts in a manner that's violative of the core, the truth, the integrity of the person that we need to be, that person that we need to be is crying out, is protesting. And that I consider to be the call of the cry of conscience. So we have to be faithful to who we are meant to be, but that goal will become meaningful only those who believe that all of us are purposeful or purposive creations of God. If you assume yourself to be an accidental bubble, a bubble of life that just came up somehow randomly in the flow of life, and a man and a woman came together and accidentally, without your asking for it, without any rhyme or reason, you came into existence, and all you have to do thereafter is to sit your time out. You have to endure till you tumble into your grave and disappear. If that's your idea, then idea of life, idea about yourself, then what I say now will not make any sense. But if you believe that there is something very special about you, you are unique, and that uniqueness always means that there is a purpose that is meant to be fulfilled by you and only through you, then you will realize that you need to be faithful to that particular core of divine intention regarding you. That's faithfulness. Now, there's also another dimension to this faithfulness, that is faithfulness to the species to which we belong. We belong to the human species. And God's image is invested in the human species. That's what the Bible says. In His image, He created them. The Bible doesn't say that God created an individual in his own image. God's image, if it is to be discerned at all, can be discerned only in the sum total of humanity, indeed, the sum total of all forms and manifestations of life. For God is the fountainhead of life, and therefore, if you want to arrive at an idea of God, you have to really hold together the sum total of life manifested in any which form, anywhere in the world, in the cosmos, whatever. That's why it's difficult for the human brain to comprehend God. Because we are a small part of that much larger thing, inconceivably large phenomenon. Therefore, a small little part can understand the whole only to a very small extent. So, faithfulness is a very important aspect of being human and developing our personality. So, three important principles. There much more needs to be said about the third, but I realize that time is already up. Therefore, I'm not going to speak more about it. The three important ingredients of building a healthy, wholesome personality that we have considered in this video. First is memory. Second, obedience to the will of God. Third, faithfulness. That's why in Hamlet, the uncle of Hamlet, Polonius, gives a particular piece of advice. Polonius is not a very good character in that play, but he says, above all, to thine own self be true. What he says is absolutely correct, though he himself is not faithful to the dictum that he sort of teaches others. I'll quote that once again. Above all, to thine own self be true. That faithfulness is something that we cannot fail to abide by. And in fact, most of our regrets, the regrets that begin to haunt us when the light of life begins to shade and the evening of life comes upon us, is on account of having violated the faithfulness that is required of us. Faithfulness to ourselves, faithfulness to the species to which we belong. But then, this faithfulness, this twofold faithfulness, becomes real, meaningful, and worthwhile only if we have a larger awareness, and that larger awareness is the Almighty God, who is the Creator. It's within the larger framework of creation that we exist, and therefore all these aspects of existence become meaningful only if there is that framework of the Creator's relationship to the created. And therefore, in an age of disbelief, in an age of skepticism, in an age of crass materialism, where only matter is supposed to be real and nothing beyond matter needs to be taken seriously, you'll find once that framework is gone, everything falls apart. And that's the condition that William Butler Yeats describes in his poem, The Second Coming. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the earth. What is that? The falcon cannot hear the faulkner. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the earth. The blood-dim tide is loose. So on and so it goes like that. It talks about the chaos, the existential chaos that marks modern life. So, just three principles, three words, easy to remember: memory, obedience, faithfulness. Thank you, and I wish you all the very best in the days ahead.